it's important for people to know that there wasn't the issue with Sedevacantism that there is now in the society, that Bishop Dolan was always known as the seminarian, known as Daniel Dolan was a known Sedevacantist. What was the attitude towards Sedevacantism in the seminary, and how is that different from how the society deals with it today?
Well, I think you could say that at the beginning, that is to say after the first suppression by the Vatican during the reign of Paul VI, that actually you were viewed as being on the Archbishop's side and loyal to Lefebvre if you were a Sedevacantist, and it was certainly well received. Bishop Sanborn would say this just be an excellent example of the classic zigzag. But at a certain, for a few years there, until the famous bear hug of JP2 with Lefebvre at the Vatican, which changed everything. But until then, that was not only an acceptable position, but it was viewed with a certain amount of favor.
Yes. I remember then Father Gaillard de Laurier, and I believe it was in 1973 or 74, but as I recall, it was before the suppression of 74, that he gave a conference about it. It was by invitation only, but it was not secret. He gave a conference. It was presenting his thesis concerning the vacancy of the see. And, there were seminarians with whom he spoke that were Sedevacantists. You didn't keep it a secret. It was not something that you whispered. It's just that was what you held, and nobody really said anything about it.
It wasn't really even known by the name, Sedevacantism at that point. That's only something that actually came up in the 80s, that you just believed that Paul VI was not a Catholic and was a false pope.
Yeah.
And that was that.
Right, and the first priest ordained by Archbishop Lefebvre, an Anglican convert, Peter Morgan, he was certainly well known for promoting that, as was Father Barbara, who at that time, the noted French traditionalist leader, was a friend of Archbishop Lefebvre and was well received at Écône in the first years. He too. So it's the same thing as the liturgical questions. There was for years. There's absolutely no controversy about it. In fact, I can remember at the first little German seminary in Wiesbaden in Switzerland, I can remember Father Schmidberger making sort of philo-Sedevacantist comments about how they had taken down or covered up the picture of Paul VI, and that's difficult.
Yes, well, I remember the first day that Father Schmidberger arrived with, here's the, Argentine Cardinal Bergoglio has been elected the anti-pope. So,
Bergoglio.
Yes. But anyway, but I remember they both Fathers Votsa and then seminarians and Schmidberger were open Sedevacantists. I remember having a discussion with him the day he arrived, and they were very, very clear about their being Sedevacantists, and that was in 1972. So there was no controversy about it. It was just something that you could say, and although you didn't make a big scene out of it either.
Yeah.
Well, and so you all made it without being expelled for Sedevacantism, and one by one make it back to the United States. I think the then Father Dolan was probably a bit too dangerous to send to America, so I think he was banished to England.
No, actually, I requested to go to England because my priest hero, Father Morgan, was there, and I thought this would be the place to go. So I went there, and I spent a few months there working in England. So, and because as I say, there wasn't any controversy about anything like that any more than there was about the liturgical questions. So, in other words, like what should be emerging for our listeners, Stephen, at this point, is that the picture is not at all what you think. So what was Acon like in the early 70s when we went there? Well, it was confused. There were modernist forces and traditionalist forces battling, you might say. Archbishop Lefebvre was a diplomat sometimes, and then sometimes more strident, shall we say, like the Lille Mass is a good example of that. And then, as regards to liturgy, it was the same thing. These different traditions were certainly accepted. None of these things were controversies at that time. And if anything, to be a quote-unquote hardliner, put you on the side of Archbishop Lefebvre from at least 4 years, maybe
74 to 78. Yeah, 74. You were on the good side. Yes.
We were on, and we were. Sometimes indeed we would bask in his approval, and then other times when the winds changed from the Vatican, then not so much.
Well, sure. When he said something like, "We have nothing to do with the conciliar church, which is a schismatic church, which has nothing to do with Catholicism," I'm sure you all were doing fine.
That's right. We were good with that, as they would say today.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So, in any event, all of you managed to be ordained, despite your great sin of Sedevacantism. And what happened, for those who don't know, what happened with John Paul II that changed things for the society?
The bear hug.
The bear hug, yeah.
Sure. That changed everything. He went to Rome shortly after the election, and John Paul II gave him a big hug, typical of John Paul II. And there they discussed the whole thing, and John Paul II tried to be very fatherly to him, and there was hatched the formula of accepting the council in the light of tradition, and it was hatched by John Paul II. And so Archbishop Lefebvre latched on to that very much. This is the key, that we can accept the council in light of tradition, that is, give it a hermeneutic of continuity, essentially, give it a spin. That's the only thing you could call it, a spin, saying something that it really didn't say, but we can understand it or have it that way. That's what everyone really meant by it, or at least that's what Archbishop Lefebvre meant by it. And so that became the banner of the Society of St. Pius X, accepting the council in the light of tradition. And then there was this great movement started to reconcile with the modernists and to regain the approval of the modernist hierarchy for the Society of St. Pius X. Now, a curious thing that happened in this time, just as a footnote, is that after the suppression took place, the Archbishop Lefebvre decided that the society graduated from a pious union, the way it was founded and recognized by the Diocese of Fribourg, and graduated to a congregation of priests without vows, which is a big step up, even though it was a suppressed congregation. That happened in 1977. I remember getting the papers in the mail. We just got these papers saying, well, by the way, we are, and I thought, that's interesting. And that's just the part of the evolution of this thing. So he obviously wanted to do that in order to have the Vatican recognize it as a more than a pious union, and to get it recognized as something like that. So. But in 1978, that's when everything changed, and then the liberals were the good guys, and the Sedevacantists were the most evil creatures that walked upon the earth, and anybody that expressed any kind of hard line with regard to the modernists, short of Sedevacantism, he was held in disrepute.
Yes, and this had happened rather quickly because. Shortly in August of the same year, we were having dinner at Oyster Bay with Archbishop Lefebvre, myself and a number of other priests, and I was going to press him a little bit on the Pope question, and this was before the election of JP2, And so I brought up the question of religious liberty, and I said, is it heresy? And then he said, yes, of course it is. And then I said, well, how does that affect the question of the Pope? Doesn't it mean that a heretic cannot be Pope? And then he said, very famously in French, I don't say that the Pope is not the Pope, but I don't say that you cannot say that the Pope is not the Pope. Bishop Sanborn could give us that in French. So he even laughed because it sounds very amusing in French.
There's a lot of peas in it.
A lot of
Peter
peas
Piper
in it.
picked the peck of pickled peas.
And we all laughed. And we thought this was great, but then he soon got the bear hug, and everything changed.
But this all illustrates exactly the personality of Archbishop Lefebvre and the whole history of the society. That is to say, in a sense, all of the politics here are personal. And the dynamic, he was a very diplomatic man and also someone who wanted to please his audience. So if he was with us, he would take a slightly more hard line, and if he was in the Vatican, he would be slightly more agreeable. And he always, as a diplomat, he would always try to continue that balancing act. But I wanted to mention, too, Bishop Sanborn says very interesting. All of a sudden we became a society of priests without vows. We also found ourselves to be a society of priests without any rights. And that too, has never changed all these years. You have, as Father Cekada says, the only right you have in the society is the Miranda, right? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a kangaroo court. And that has never, ever, ever changed. That says those are some of the great truths. There's no such thing as canon law. There's no such thing as that balance, the right of priests. The society, back to the time of Archbishop Lefebvre, never, so for a supposedly priestly society, took any care for its members who were sick, maybe mentally ill or a breakdown, anything like that. No, they were always just thrown out. They were never taken care of. And if you objected to the policy of the day, you too would be thrown out. And that has never changed. That's going on still today. So it's not a priestly society, it's an anti-priestly society. Actually, if you look at it that sense, what you do to one of these, my least brethren, you do unto me. Wow, how sad. How sad. Yeah, this is all part of a balanced viewpoint of Lefebvre.
The idea that it turned into a society of the common life without vows, to me, was something that was absurd, because I had been in the Cistercian order for 2 years, and we had 2 years of courses 2 years actually of studying of the canon law and the rights of religious and the obligations of religious, and all of these things. The order was run according to a whole book full of rules, and all of the prescriptions of canon law were followed, and you had certain rights, you had certain obligations, and this was hundreds of pages of stuff, and you had nothing like that in the Society of St. Pius X. You had 20 pages of type stuff, double-spaced, and that was it. And you had, as Bishop Dolan said, in effect, the superiors had no obligation whatsoever towards you. That has not changed, and you can see that in the fate of the latest 3 priests in France of the Society of St. Pius X, that they are on the way out, and there's nothing
that was
a
forgery, Father. That was a conspiracy.
Oh yeah,
that
that's right.
I should also point out that at this point, the organization becomes truly Lefebvrist. That there has been so much zigzagging and doctrinal change that it's clear that the only survivors in it will be those who are so personally attached to Archbishop Lefebvre that they will change their minds as he changes his mind and go in whatever direction he leads them, no matter if that direction should be completely opposite of what was yesterday, doctrinally and liturgically or whatever it is. And that principle was out the door. That really crystallized at this point. That if you were to be a survivor, you had to be a Lefebvrist.
I think we're up to, let's say, 1980, Your Excellencies and Father, and the imposition of, let's say, a an unofficial or official don't ask, don't tell policy on Sedevacantism. Is that fair?
Yes, that was it.
That's essentially it, yeah.
Well, that developed in 1980 when there was, in 1979, the letter went out, and I remember receiving it, that the society cannot bear to have within its bosom anyone that says that John Paul II is not the Pope and will not mention him in the canon. And then the guillotine was brought out with that if you don't mention him in the canon, you're out of the society, with that same due process of law that Father, I'm being sarcastic, that Father Cekada mentioned, or Father Bishop Dolan. So there were a number of expulsions in France, Father Guépin, Father Belmont, and these were high-profile people. They had been at Écône since day one. And although, there were not a great many expulsions, for that time it was quite a bit, because they had, maybe a total less than 100 priests at the time. There were 4 or 5 expulsions in France, and it became clear that the same was going to be done over here. Well, Archbishop Lefebvre came over in the spring of 1980, and in a meeting in which it was expected that the Sedevacantist priests would be kicked out, they came to a don't ask, don't tell agreement, whereby if you keep your mouth shut about what you're doing and you don't spread it around that you are not mentioning him in the canon, then you can stay in the Society of St. Pius X.
And how it happened, that really illustrates the reality of Archbishop Lefebvre's society. It's all about Lefebvre. So he came to the priory in Long Island on a May evening, and we had organized May devotions with benediction, and he saw that, and he was edified by that, and also the fact that the people heard that the Archbishop was coming, so the people came. So then he thinks to himself 2 things, I'm thinking. They're not so bad. Look, these priests, they're pious, and they haven't turned the people against me. Look at all their people who have come out to see me. So again, it's something personal. And he's thinking to himself, well, just as he made an arrangement on the one hand with John Paul II, he could make an arrangement with the Sedevacantists on the other side. And so I think the first night he had intended to expel us, and then the next morning after breakfast he proposes a deal.
Yep.
And it's a deal based on don't ask, don't tell, and you'll be quiet and discreet, and we'll make this work.
So is the lesson that you're supposed to sleep on it or have the meatloaf, or?
Well, the meatloaf came later, but it was the sleep-on thing. He slept on it because he did, because I think everybody was so friendly, and that took him aback. And since it's all about Lefebvre, well, everyone was friendly to Lefebvre, and so why not make a deal?
But that's a very important point. Excuse me. That question was settled in 1980.
Yes.
And there was no question of that in 1983, and the Society mendaciously said that this is the reason why they're leaving.
Yes.
In 1983, that was a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That had
all been settled.